The first call was to my lawyer. The second was to my financial planner. The third was to a real estate agent I'd worked with for almost 15 years. By the time the ferry lights came on across the harbor that evening, I'd set something in motion that nobody in my family saw coming. I didn't raise my voice when I made those calls. I didn't slam a single door. I just sat in my study with a cup of coffee going cold beside me and worked through my list, one name at a time, calm as a man planning a fishing trip. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Nathaniel Woodrow. I'm 64 years old, and for 11 years I was a stepfather to a young woman named Juliana. I met her mother, Beatrice, at a charity dinner for the IWK Health Center here in Halifax. Bea was a widow, kind, quick to laugh, the kind of woman who remembered everyone's birthday without being asked. Juliana was 17 when her mother and I married, already halfway through high school, with her father's photograph still sitting on her dresser. He'd died of a heart attack when she was 9. I never once tried to replace him. I told her that on the very first Christmas we spent together, sitting at the kitchen table while she picked at a plate of shortbread. I said, "I'm not here to be your dad. I'm here because I love your mother, and if you'll let me, I'd like to help however I can." She'd nodded, not quite looking at me, and that was that. And I was there for 11 years. I paid her tuition when she got into Dalhousie for commerce. I paid for her apartment near Quinpool Road when residents felt too loud for her. I bought her first car, a used Honda Civic, nothing fancy, when the bus schedule stopped working with her class times. I covered the deposit and half the losses when she and a friend tried to open a small bakery on Agricola Street that folded after 8 months. I never said a word about it, just helped her wind it down properly and settle what she owed the landlord. I drove 3 hours to Antigonish at 11 at night once because her car broke down on the highway, and she was too scared to wait alone. I sat with her in emergency at the QEII when she got food poisoning at a wedding and needed someone to hold her hair back. I was there when she and her mother had one of their screaming matches and needed someone in the room who wasn't emotionally invested enough to make it worse. Bea used to tell me I spoiled her. Maybe I did. But Juliana was the closest thing I was ever going to have to a daughter of my own. My first marriage ended before children came into it, and I wanted this second chance at family to mean something. 2 years ago, Juliana got engaged to a young man named Spencer. Good fellow. Worked in software out of an office downtown near the waterfront, treated her decently as far as I could see. I was happy for her. Genuinely happy, not the performed kind. They picked a date for late September and started planning something big. A vineyard out in the Annapolis Valley, close to 180 guests, a string trio, flowers flown in, because apparently the local florists couldn't get what she wanted in time. The whole production. One evening, Bea asked me over dinner what I thought we should put toward it. I told her not to worry, that I'd cover the wedding in full. "It's what fathers do," I said. "Even the ones who came along partway through." Juliana hugged me so hard when I told her that she nearly knocked the wind out of me. She actually cried a little. Said I was the best thing that had happened to their family. Said Spencer's people could never have managed something this size on their own. Bea reached across the table and squeezed my hand the way she used to. Before things between us had gone quiet and careful, I remember thinking, foolishly, that we'd finally arrived somewhere good. I should have known better. 3 weeks before everything came apart, Juliana and Spencer came by the house to go over seating charts. We were at the dining table, printouts everywhere, working out who could sit near whom without an incident, when her phone rang. It was her Uncle Oswald, her late father's younger brother, out in Montreal. They'd always stayed close. He used to send her a card every year on the anniversary of her father's death, which I always thought was a decent thing to do. She put him on speaker. They talked about the wedding for a few minutes. He said he wouldn't miss it for the world, that he was already looking at flights. Then he asked if her father would have been proud of her. Her eyes went glassy. She said, "Yes, absolutely." They talked for a bit about her dad, how he used to two-step with her in the kitchen when she was small, badly, off the beat, and she'd laugh every time. I didn't mind any of that. He was her father. He belonged in her life and in her memory, and I never once tried to take up space where he should be. Then Oswald said something that stopped the room cold. "And I'm glad you're keeping it just family, Jules. Your dad would have wanted that. No outsiders, just the people who actually matter." She laughed. Not an uncomfortable laugh. An easy one. I know, right? That's exactly what I want. Just real family. I looked over at Bea. She was staring hard at the seating chart like it had suddenly become the most important document in the province. Spencer shifted in his chair and studied the tablecloth. I asked Juliana, as evenly as I could manage, what her uncle meant by no outsiders. She looked at me the way you'd look at someone who'd walked into the middle of a private conversation. She took the phone off speaker, said something quiet into it about calling him back, and walked into the kitchen. When she came back, she said it wasn't a big deal, that Oswald was just excited, that I was reading into it. I asked again, Juliana, what did he mean, no outsiders? She glanced at Spencer. Spencer looked at his hands, then she said it. Nathaniel, you've been good to us, you really have. But this is my wedding day. It's about me and Spencer, and it's about honoring my dad's memory. I think it would be better if you weren't there. I thought I'd misheard her. I said, what? I don't want you at the wedding. Bea finally looked up, opened her mouth like a word might come out of it, and nothing did. I said, I'm paying for the wedding, Juliana. I know, and I'm grateful I am. But this isn't about the money. It's about what feels right. Having you there, in the front row, like you're my father, it feels wrong. My dad's gone. You're not him. You've been kind to me. But let's be honest about what this actually is. The room went completely silent except for the furnace kicking on somewhere below us. Spencer said quietly, Jules, maybe we should talk about this later. She didn't even glance at him. She kept her eyes on me, and there wasn't anger in her face. There was something worse, something almost gentle, like she was explaining a math problem to someone slow. She said, I've thought about this a lot. The more I plan this wedding, the more I want it to be honest. I want my dad's memory there, front and center, and I can't do that with you sitting in his chair pretending to be him. I never pretended to be your father, I said. You kind of did, though. You always acted like you had some kind of claim on my life, like I owed you something for it. Bea said very softly, Juliana, that's not fair. Juliana turned on her mother. Mom, you know it's true. He's always hovering, always asking questions, always trying to insert himself. I'm 28 years old. I don't need a father anymore. I especially don't need a stand-in. I stood up. I needed to move, needed something to do besides sit there and absorb it. So you want me to pay for the wedding, I said, but not attend it. I mean, if you want to put it that way, sure. I'm not saying you have to pay. If you don't want to anymore, that's fine, Spencer and I will manage. I looked at Bea again. She was crying now, silently, and she said nothing. She didn't correct her daughter. She didn't defend 11 years of Sunday dinners and hockey games and hospital waiting rooms. That's when I understood this wasn't just Juliana's opinion sitting alone at that table. It was Bea's too, unspoken, but they're all the same, in the way she wouldn't meet my eyes. I said very calmly, All right. Juliana blinked. All right, what? All right, I won't come to the wedding. Is there anything else you need to tell me? She looked relieved, almost pleased. No, that's it. I'm glad you understand. This doesn't change anything between us. I still care about you. But this day needs to be right. Spencer stood up and said they should probably head out. Juliana gathered her printouts. On her way to the door, she turned and said, Thanks for being cool about it. You're a good guy. Then they were gone. Bea and I sat in that living room without a word passing between us for a long time. Finally, she said Juliana hadn't meant it the way it sounded. I said, Yes, she did. She said her daughter was emotional about the wedding, that she missed her father, that I shouldn't take it personally. I said, Bea, your daughter just told me I've been pretending for 11 years. How exactly am I supposed to take that? She had no answer. I said, And you didn't say a single word in my defense. She said, What did you want me to say? She's my daughter, Nathaniel. I can't control her feelings. I said, You could have told her she was wrong. You could have told her family isn't only blood. Bea wiped her eyes and said quietly, Maybe she's right, though. Maybe we've all just been pretending. That was the moment I understood my marriage was already over. I didn't argue. I didn't try to talk her out of it. I got up, walked upstairs to my study, and closed the door behind me. Then I started making those calls. The next morning I told Bea I had some business to take care of and would be out most of the day. She barely lifted her head from her coffee. My first stop was my lawyer, Rosalind Fitch, a woman I'd known since we sat on a hospital foundation board together 20 years ago. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting once, then pulled a legal pad toward her and started writing. "Are you sure about this?" she asked. "Completely. This is going to hurt people, Nathaniel. They hurt me first." She nodded and said, "All right, let's talk about the house." The house was mine alone. I'd bought it in the South End 8 years before Bea and I married. A big old character home a few blocks up from the Northwest Arm, 4 bedrooms, a view of the sailboats in summer. Bea's name had never gone on the deed. We'd talked about it once early on, and then simply never got around to it, the way you don't get around to things when you assume you have all the time in the world. Rosalind confirmed I had every right to sell it. Bea had no legal claim unless she could show she'd contributed substantially to the mortgage or the renovations, and she hadn't. I'd paid for the new roof, the kitchen, all of it, out of my own accounts. I asked how fast a sale could move if I wanted it done quickly. "In this market, in this neighborhood, 2 to 3 weeks if you price it to sell," she said. I told her to do it. From there I went to see my financial advisor, Elias Thorne, at his office on Spring Garden Road. I told him I wanted everything untangled, no joint cheekwing, no shared line of credit, nothing that connected my name to Bea's in a bank's computer anymore. My RRSPs, my TFSA, the small portfolio I'd built up over 3 decades. I wanted it all clean, all mine, clearly documented. He asked the same question Rosalind had. I gave the same answer. Last, I met with a real estate agent named Preston Doyle, who'd sold me the house originally, and had been trying to get me to list ever since Bea and I talked half-heartedly about downsizing a couple of years back. I told him I wanted it on the market immediately, sold before the month was out. He whistled. "That's fast, Nathaniel. Everything okay?" I said, "I'm making a change." He said he could have photographers out within the week. I drove home after that. Bea was in the kitchen when I walked in. She asked where I'd been. "Taking care of things," I said. She told me Juliana had called, wanting to know if we could all have dinner the following week to finalize a few last wedding details. I said, "You can have dinner with her. I won't be there." Bea frowned. "Told me not to be like this," said Juliana had apologized. I said, "No, she didn't. She felt bad. That's not the same thing." Bea said that was basically the same thing. I said it wasn't and went upstairs. Over the following 2 weeks, I moved through that house like a man already gone from it. Bea asked more than once what was wrong. I told her nothing, that I was just busy. She seemed to accept it, or chose to. The for sale sign went up on a Wednesday morning. Bea saw it when she got home from her book club that afternoon, still holding her car keys, her face gone pale as chalk. "Why is there a sign on our lawn? Because I'm selling the house." "You're what?" "I'm selling it. It's mine. I'm selling it. You can't do that. I live here. Not for much longer." She stared at me for a long moment. "Nathaniel, what is going on with you?" "I'm disappearing, Bea. That's what your daughter wanted, isn't it?" "For me to not be there, so I'm taking her advice. I'm removing myself from this family." She said I was being ridiculous, that this was insane, that we could go to counseling, work it out, talk it through like adults. I told her counseling wouldn't undo the fact that after 11 years I was still just the man who paid the bills and sat outside the family photograph. The house sold in 11 days. A young couple who'd just moved from Toronto for the tech scene. Cash offer, $1.6 million. Preston called me himself to say it was one of the fastest closings he'd handled all year. I accepted on the spot. Closing was set for 3 weeks out. Bea moved into a hotel near the hospital where she worked. She called me most days, sometimes twice, begging me to stop, to slow down, to think about what I was doing to the family. I let most of the calls go to voicemail. When I did answer, I kept it short. The decision had already been made. There was nothing left to discuss. Juliana called too. She was furious. She said I was punishing her mother for something that had nothing to do with her, that I was being cruel, that she'd already apologized. What more did I want? I said, "You didn't apologize, Juliana. You said you felt bad. Those aren't the same words." She said, "Fine, I'm sorry." "Is that what you want to hear?" I said, "It's 11 years too late." She asked what that even meant. I said, "It means I spent 11 years showing up for you, and the one time it actually mattered, you told me I was nobody. So now I'm acting like nobody. I'm disappearing, exactly like you asked." She cried. She said I was ruining her wedding, ruining her life. I told her, "I'm not coming to your wedding. I'm not paying for it. I'm not paying for anything else, going forward. You're 28, you'll figure it out." She said I'd already promised. I said, "And you promised I was family. We both said things that turned out not to be true. Then I hung up. Spencer called the next day, careful, polite. Said he understood I was upset, but could we talk this through like reasonable people? I told him this didn't involve him. He said, "It kind of does. You're pulling the funding for our wedding," I said. "I'm pulling funding for a wedding I'm not invited to. That seems fair to me." He said Juliana was willing to invite me now, if that would fix things. I told him I didn't want a pity invitation. I wanted to have mattered in the first place. Since that clearly hadn't been true, I was removing myself from the equation. He tried a while longer. I wished him well and ended the call. The night before closing, I went back to the house one last time. The new owners hadn't taken possession yet, but every piece of furniture was already gone, sold, donated, or sitting in a storage unit off the Bedford Highway. My footsteps echoed on the hardwood the way they do in empty houses, that particular hollow sound. I walked through each room slowly. The dining room where Juliana had told me I wasn't her father. The kitchen where Bea and I used to drink coffee every morning before work, watching the fog burn off the arm. The bedroom where we'd slept for 11 years. On the kitchen counter, I left a black binder. Inside, it was a record of every dollar I'd spent on Juliana over 11 years. Tuition receipts from Dalhousie, rent payments, the car loan, the bakery's outstanding debts I'd settled, groceries, medical bills, plane tickets, the whole accounting of a life I'd helped hold up. I'd spent months putting it together, going through old bank statements and credit card records, digging receipts out of boxes in the storage unit. Rosalind had helped me organize it chronologically. Page by page, each one dated and labeled. The total came to just over $340,000. At the back of the binder, I left a letter. "Juliana, you told me I wasn't your father. You told me I'd been pretending for 11 years. You were wrong about the pretending. I never once faked anything I did for you. But you were right that I'm not your father. He died when you were 9. I'm only the man who stayed after that. This binder is what staying looked like, measured in dollars, because dollars are the only language that seems undeniable. I'm not asking you to repay any of it. That was never the point. I wanted you to see what it looks like when someone chooses you, year after year, without being asked to. Your father would have done the same, and likely more. He would have loved you without conditions, cheered for the failures as loudly as the winds, shown up at midnight when you needed him. I tried to do that too. You've made it clear it wasn't enough. Or maybe it was too much. Or maybe it simply didn't matter because I was never the right man for the role. That's your call to make. It's mine to accept it and move on. I won't be at your wedding. I won't be paying for it or for anything else. Not out of spite, though I won't pretend I'm not angry. Not for revenge, though a part of me won't deny wanting one. But because you ask me to disappear, and I'm honoring that request. I hope the day is everything you want. I hope Spencer treats you well. I hope your life fills up with people who meet whatever standard you've set for real family. I won't be one of them anymore. Take care of yourself." Nathaniel locked the door behind me and drove to the small rental condo I'd taken near the waterfront, something temporary while I sorted out where to land next. My phone rang at 7 the next morning. Bea, screaming. I'd never once heard that woman raise her voice like that in 11 years of marriage. She'd gone by the house to collect a few things she'd left behind. The new owners had let her in before they moved their own furniture over. That's when she found the binder. She read the whole thing standing at the counter, then called Juliana, who drove over and read it again with her, the two of them sitting on the bare kitchen floor. Bea kept screaming into the phone that I was cruel, that I was petty, that I'd turned a family disagreement into a war. I said, "Bea, Juliana told me to disappear. I disappeared. I'm not sure why that's a surprise." She said the wedding was 6 weeks away. How was Juliana supposed to pay for any of it now? I said that wasn't my concern anymore. She said, $340,000, Nathaniel. You kept track of every cent. What kind of a man does that? I said, the kind who wanted proof that he mattered, since it seems nobody else was going to remember it for him. Juliana got on the line, crying too hard to be understood at first. She said she was sorry, that she hadn't meant it, that she'd been selfish and stupid, and now she understood exactly what I'd done for her all those years. I said, "You meant it, Juliana. Every word. The only thing you're sorry about is that there are consequences now," she begged. She said she'd invite me back, front row. I could even walk her down the aisle if I wanted. I told her I didn't want a pity invitation. I wanted to have been respected in the first place. She offered to pay me back, somehow, though she had no idea how she'd manage it on a junior analyst's salary. I told her to keep her money and spend it on a good therapist instead, maybe figure out why she thought people were disposable once she'd used them up. Then I hung up. Over the following days, I heard from Uncle Oswald in Montreal, from two of B's sisters out in Fredericton, from Juliana's roommate, all of them wanting to tell me I was overreacting, that I was punishing everyone for one bad conversation. I stopped picking up. Spencer eventually sent an email instead of calling. He said they'd had to scale the wedding down significantly, moved from the vineyard in the valley to a small restaurant on Hollis Street, the guest list cut from 180 to about 40. No string trio, no imported flowers, a simple dinner instead. He said Juliana was devastated, that Bea wasn't speaking to her daughter, blamed her entirely for what had happened to the family. He asked one last time if I'd reconsider. I didn't answer. The wedding went ahead as scheduled. I know because one of Bea's sisters posted photographs on Facebook, small but tasteful. Juliana wore a simple dress, nothing like the gown she'd shown me on her phone months earlier. Spencer wore a rented suit. I looked at those pictures and felt nothing at all. Not satisfaction, not sadness, just a kind of flat, distant nothing, the way you feel looking at a photograph of a house you used to live in. Bea filed for divorce about 3 months later. I didn't contest a thing. Rosalind handled it cleanly and it was finalized within half a year. Bea sent me one letter during that stretch. She said she hoped I was happy now that I'd destroyed the family. She said she'd wasted 11 years on me. She said I was a bitter, small man who couldn't handle a bruised ego. I didn't respond. Juliana wrote too. A long rambling letter full of apology and explanation. She said she'd been overwhelmed by wedding stress, that she hadn't thought before she spoke, that she understood now what I'd given up for her and would spend the rest of her life being grateful for it. I didn't believe most of it, though I appreciated that she'd bothered to write it by hand instead of texting. I didn't respond to that one either. 6 months after the divorce, I moved out to Lunenburg, on the South Shore a couple of hours down the coast. I'd always loved it out there. The old wooden houses painted every color, the harbor, the quiet. I bought a small place overlooking the water, with what was left after the settlement, and I started volunteering at the Community Learning Center downtown, teaching basic financial literacy to young people who'd never had anyone explain a mortgage or an RRSP to them properly. I joined a curling club, which I'd never had time for before. I took up woodworking in the garage, nothing fancy, small boxes and cutting boards, but it kept my hands busy in the evenings. People ask sometimes if I have family. I tell them I used to. Most don't push for more than that. I'm 64 now. I've got enough set aside to be comfortable for the rest of my life. I've got a routine I like. Curling on Tuesdays, the learning center on Thursdays, long walks along the harbor when the weather allows it, which in Nova Scotia is never guaranteed. I don't think about Juliana much anymore. When I do, there's no anger left in it, just a kind of distance, like remembering someone I knew a long time ago in a different life. I don't think much about Bea either. Mostly, I think about the choices I made and whether I'd do any of it differently. I wouldn't. People assume revenge is about hurting the person who hurt you. It isn't. Not really. It's about taking your dignity back. It's about refusing to keep being useful to people who've already told you, out loud, that you don't count. I didn't destroy that family. They did that themselves, the moment they decided I was replaceable. I only accepted the decision and acted accordingly. Juliana wanted me gone. So I went. Not the polite, partial version she probably had in mind, where I'd quietly skip the ceremony, but keep paying the bills and answering the midnight calls, and playing the grateful stepfather who knew his place. I disappeared completely. I took my time, my money, my attention, and I put them toward people who actually valued having them. That isn't cruelty. That's self-respect. Last month I got a message through Facebook from Spencer. He said Juliana had had their first child, a daughter, and that they'd named her Beatrice after her grandmother. He said Juliana had been talking a lot lately about family, about wanting to do better with her own daughter than she'd done with the people who'd cared for her. He said she'd like to talk, sometime if I were open to it. I read the message twice. Then I closed the app without replying. I'm 64 years old. I don't have the years left to spend teaching grown adults something they should have learned a long time ago. I've got a set of dovetail joints to finish in the garage this weekend. I've got a curling bonspiel next month I've actually been looking forward to. My life is small now, but it's mine, and nobody in it has ever once made me feel like an outsider standing in my own home. Juliana got exactly what she asked for. I disappeared, and somewhere in the middle of disappearing, I found something I hadn't even realized I'd lost.